Okay, so maybe the last thing we can talk about is, do you feel that these themes that we're talking about, the ever-present kind of background and theme of nature, how is that related to all of that? Because this is very, very obvious that there is that connection with nature. And do you feel that there's a message in the nature presence itself through these books? So, for example, I'm just going to mention one thing, which is actually quite different from almost anything else that's in those descriptions of nature. And that is that, now, I can't remember, I think it's the third book, might be Out of the Island. There's this enormous storm that's, and that's quite different to all the pretty things that are usually described. And I think, so I sort of got it like, there's the beauty and there's romance in nature, but there's also danger and respect. And I was just wondering how you felt that, what role essentially does nature play in these books from your perspective?
Right. Well, I think you're right. It's almost a character in itself. It's just ever present, and it's perfect because Anne loves nature. She loves beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she comes to Avonlea, I think there's a lot of abundance of nature. And I really love how she renames things like the Lake of Shining Waters and Lover's Lane and, the Snow Queen and all of that, because she feels like their current names aren't tribute enough to their beauty, and she needs to make them more,
well, yes, Barry's Pond is not exactly
yeah, exactly. And I love the innocence of that, and how she responds to that, how she realizes she belongs there. And I think also nature kind of changes with each book. So like in Avonlea, it's about this abundance of beauty. And then, I think maybe in Anne of the Island, it's a little more subtle, a little more nuanced. I think she has that cemetery which she loves to walk through, but it is a reminder of, like love, but also sadness because there are lives lost, that they explore that as well. And then in once she gets married, moves to Four Winds, that's like a more, it's the harbor, and you read about the blueness of the water and all of that, the sparkling waters, and it's more of like, I think, a mature kind of beauty. Like it's kind of almost like how she's grown up, grown more mature herself. Like it kind of reflects that. I don't know, maybe it doesn't make sense, but that's what I was thinking of. Like it kind of changes with her life as well. And I thought of the same thing, the same incident that you mentioned with the storm at the end of book 3, which is a literary device. I think they call it pathetic fallacy, right? Where nature reflects your own feelings. And that's the time when that storm happens is when she realizes Gilbert's dying. And then once the storm stops and, the beautiful dawn kind of comes, that's when she realizes he's going to be fine. And she discovers like this patch of roses, which is a surprise as well. So I love how, and I was also reading the part about Matthew's death, and that was described as a very tranquil night. Both preceding and the night of his passing was described as very tranquil and peaceful, and that's kind of like the person that he was as well. Just there's a softness to it, and I'm sure that was deliberate on Ellen.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. No, yeah.
Although there was grief, but there was a softness to it, which represents, I think, her relationship with Matthew as well. So yeah, nature definitely is just. I mean, I didn't always notice it. I mean, the kind of, it's obvious, obviously, like when you read it immediately, it's there, the first paragraph, the first book. But so it's there in a very obvious way, like visually she's using it to describe everything, but it's also there in these more subtle ways to kind of describe Anne's journey and her relationships.
Yes, and there's also this aspect of it that almost nobody that lives away from it in these books. That is to say that, you have a description of a house she goes to, some of these ladies that she visits as, when she's a teacher in the fourth book, some rather sort of chatty people who actually over chat her, which is quite impressive. And but you have a description of those houses, and they're always surrounded by the natural. And I think nowadays it can feel quite I live in a large city, and so it's sometimes very difficult to actually get maybe outside of your own garden, and those. But generally, we have sort of cordoned ourselves off from nature in lots of ways, and I think it's quite telling that that's what she thinks is part of humanity, I would say. And as you say, these linking these to these feelings that she's experiencing in those different parts of the story, that is so it's quite obvious that the love of it is there. I connect to it quite a lot because that's how I was born, and I always like that. I mean, I am myself, a sort of a kind of a long distance hiker as well, but I really go out just simply to actually be in nature. And obviously the moorlands of Scotland are very different to what Montgomery is describing. It's rougher, but it's kind of the same idea. And I think that there's beauty to it, but there is also value in it, in the sense that it seems to link to her being a lot of the time. I can't remember where it is. I think it's when one of those times when she's coming back in the fourth book for Green Gables visits, and she chooses to walk on her own for 2 hours or however long it takes. From the train station over there, and she's essentially on her own, and there's this linkage between you can be sort of together with your soul in nature, and then there's the Hester Gray garden as well, and those sort of aspects of it. And she's quite well aware, which doesn't really come up that often in the books, that people who live in the cities are not lucky enough to be able to live like this. And and I think the final thing I would say, I don't know what you think about this, is that in a sense that is the source of her richness, despite the fact that in different parts of the books, she, when she's at university with the girls, they describe themselves as a poor girls. There's so, and you don't really, interestingly enough, I never thought of that until that she's actually poor in a sense, because it seems that she's quite rich in other ways rather than just financial ones. So that's what I thought. Okay. So just one last thing. Yeah, go ahead if you want to add something to that.
No, I was just going to say that I agree. Nature is very restorative, I think, for her. And there are, the word ramble is used quite often, and which could mean talking a lot, but also she takes these long rambles in nature. And I've always envied her for it a little bit, because I've grown up in big cities my whole life. Mm-hmm. But my grandparents live in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. And so I used to have summers there. Yeah. And it was like the most magical time. I mean, I have a few summers there when I was growing up, but not, after that, we haven't been back so often. But it was the best time. And I remember wishing, like, I'm a little bit envious when I read the books, because she has that all the time. It's a little unfair, but it definitely plays that, important role for her. And yeah, I mean, it's restorative. I think it's really important for her soul, and she finds solace in it very often. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I have just one last thing to the last 5 minutes, and then we'll be wrapping up, which is so there's quite a lot of talk throughout these books about suffering. And it seems, or even if it's, well, at least it's implied that, for example, she's an orphan to begin with, and then she's grateful to Marilla and Matthew to take her in. And I suppose the question is then, although it's not stated directly, I don't think it is, so it might be just my interpretation of it, but would she actually have been as grateful if she hadn't been an orphan in the first place? And it seems that there's lots of kinds of moments like that there. She does say, I think it's in the second book, I might be wrong, but one of the second or the third, is that she thinks that being perfectly good would be actually a little bit boring. That is to say that you need some bad in order to be interesting. And so that seems to suggest that we need balance as well. And I was just wondering what your thoughts on that kind of approach to life was, and is that something that you had thought about before, and how, and do you think it's right to say that, or should we just be pursuing only good in life?
Well, I think, I'm not sure if I would call it suffering exactly, or whether she would think of it as suffering. I think she she uses words like sorrow and sadness and grief and
Yeah. Mhm.
sacrifice. But I don't think she ever thinks of herself as someone who suffered, which is quite
Yeah.
amazing coming from where she,
Yes. Mhm.
her background. I mean, obviously she didn't have a very good childhood, but like she doesn't talk about it too much in the books,
Mhm.
but she's always said that her imagination kind of saved her and it gave her room to kind of think of things a little differently. And then of course, every sort of good thing that's happened to her in a way has been preceded by something difficult. So
Yes.
whether she came to Avonlea after a period of being in foster homes, she lost Matthew right when things seemed that they
Yes.
were
Mhm.
all going
Yeah.
according to plan. She made that sacrifice, didn't go to college, but then when she finally got to go there, it made it more worthwhile almost, because
Yeah.
she
Mhm.
had she had made that sacrifice and she faced it very gracefully. And even her relationship with Gilbert, she almost had to lose him before she could actually take that somewhere.
Yes.
And
Sure.
with her huge family as well, she lost her first child, so
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
it's almost like a pattern. And I think definitely she realizes the value of having pitfalls as well as the
Mhm.
lows as well as the highs. And I would love to actually read out a little line from
Sure. Go
Anne of
ahead. Of course.
the Island, which I just came across. I mean, there's a whole page here. I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but there's this
Yeah.
passage where she's walking with Gilbert and he's being all, he's trying to be all romantic and say, like, if it
Mhm.
were up to me, I would never let any sorrow come into your life. And,
Yeah.
I'd make you
Mhm.
so happy.
Mhm.
And she's, of course, trying to deflect him. But what she says here, I think, also speaks to what she actually believes,
Mhm.
because she says that, um, so he says, I would shut out everything except happiness. And she says, then you would be very unwise. I'm sure no life can be properly developed and rounded out without some trial and sorrow. Though I suppose it is only when we're pretty comfortable that we admit it. And she really means this. I think she talks about this like in this whole on this whole page, and she says, I'm sure sorrow will come. Well, I hope I shall be strong and brave to meet it when it does. And that's
Yeah.
really what you can hope for, right?
Mhm.
Because we don't have any control over something like that. And all we can
Yes.
really
Mhm.
do is, or control is how we react to it.
Yes.
And,
Mhm.
she just hopes that she's going to be strong and graceful in the face
That
of that
that would link
fortune.
to
And
that, that famous quote that you see all over internet about the bend in the road, as
yeah,
well. Because, but you're right. I think, well, she certainly wouldn't have considered herself to be suffering exactly, right? Because she doesn't come across as sort of the victim of circumstances, in that way. Clearly, she wants to sort of pick herself up and carry on. But I think there's an optimism there that's like, yes, you're going to fall down, but you're going to then, and I think also it links to me to one of the things that we were talking about before, which is that the focus on other people. Other people are going to help you. So if you have good relationships with other people, then somebody there is going to be around to help you out, as you would have helped them out. So. But yes, I agree. That seems to be her life philosophy. That's but that's kind of what I meant. That there's the sorrow, and I suppose I was just thinking existentially, almost, suffering in some sort of philosophical sense. But she wouldn't have put it that way. I can't imagine that's
right, right. No,
was
I
it-
understood what you mean. Yeah, I think she realizes the merits of having those misfortunes as well, and I think you're right. Like, she tries to make the best of the circumstances, just like she sees the best in people,
Mhm.
and that is something definitely worth emulating. I mean, it's not very easy to do that. You can be resentful, and you can be kind of always pitying yourself and wondering why things are happening to you. But
Yeah,
she's mature enough to realize that it happens to everybody, and she's
that's
no
right.
exception to that. And so
Yeah.
she's just trying to make the best of it. And also, when she has the good times, she cherishes those as well. She's
Yeah.
grateful.
Yeah, I mean, my final thought on that is that we all have had the times. We're not going to go into our, but we all have. Everyone has had the times where it was very low, whatever it is. I mean, even if you're lucky to have not had any kind of anything ranging from physical illness to mental health illness or anything like that, then obviously somebody would have died in your family sooner or later, and so there's that, and we can't stop that. And I think this idea that that there is always something to look forward to around the bend is, I think it's quite powerful. And it's yes, and there is optimism there, whilst recognizing that we will all have some kind of trouble sooner or later. And I think also, you know, the fact that like having friends, and that's it doesn't seem to matter really whether they are female or male, although obviously most of them are female, but you know, but there's camaraderie there, and as I think you said this on your blog, which I will link to, which is that you know, there's all of these different women that support her throughout the university days, and then in her you know, headmistress time, and I think, yeah, so there seems to be a whole idea of how to try and orient yourself through life, which I think is applicable to anyone, not just. And so, yeah, I will finish with just making that comment that I do think that it's a huge shame that this is perceived as a book for girls. And actually, I don't really think it's a book for children either, because there's just too much in there that we can talk about as in this conversation, you know. Anyway, thank you very much for, would you like to sort of make some kind of final comment on all of this before we
yeah, sure. I would just say, so I forgot to mention this in the beginning when you asked me what her influence has been, and one of the very you know, my language has changed because of the books. Like, there are phrases that she uses all the time, which I find myself using, like kindred spirits, to describe people on the same wavelength. You know, it's just such a great phrase that I can never use anything else. And the bend in the road, like you were just saying, is so beautiful, because it's you know, you're embracing that uncertainty and realizing that not everything needs to be planned out, and you have to, you know, you have to just face things as they come, but there can be good things around that bend. And I think it's just a great way to think about life.
Yes.
So yeah.
There's for myself, there's one thing. I actually made a short video about that on the channel, which is actually quite personal in a way, except there's nothing about my family in there. It's just simply that I find that sometimes it's quite difficult to express my feelings and emotions in a range of situations. And I don't know if that links to my particular gender, so to speak, but I think lots of people have these difficulties anyhow. And there's this idea there that actually, again, that if you do, you're going to make yourself vulnerable, because other people might laugh at you, but you should still try, because otherwise you can't really understand other people and form better relationship with them. So I've been trying to do this at home more. Like, you know, you feel something good. I don't necessarily mean express every negative emotion, but it's about the positive emotions, that like let people know, because there might not be another chance, perhaps, you know. So I've been trying to do that, and that's something in there as well, quite obviously. Okay, well, thank you very much for taking the time to
thank you for having me.
Chat. Thank you very much. I hope you have a nice day, and again, thanks a lot.
You too. Thank you.